Hey guys, what's going on? This is Ed from VinylAlbumCovers.com, and I bet you never thought you'd see this again, did you? Say hi, Dre.
Hey man, it's been a while.
Oh my gosh, he actually said hi. He never says anything. You actually got to say hi. I hope you're all very happy. Under ordinary circumstances, he never says hi, and he just said hi. I don't even know what to do with myself now. I'm very confused. So I'm just going to go ahead and launch into this. Welcome back to the front, kids. So today we are going to be talking about, and we struggled with this.
Oh
This
yeah.
was ugly. So I had this horrible idea that Dre hates called the top five R&B songs of all time. This was extremely difficult for both of us. And we were actually just starting to talk about why it was difficult. But then I thought maybe we should hit record so you could hear it too. So now that I've done so, go ahead. What were you saying, Dre?
Yeah, the reason why this is so difficult is because, R&B spans at least going back into the early 40s, early to mid 40s, coming out of the swing era, that era whatsoever. We kind of made that transition to jump blues, Louis Jordan. I'm sure you're familiar with that name.
Oh
And
yeah.
so he's kind of the bridge between, the jazz swing, big band era and
Mhm.
the early modern era of R&B, going into the late 40s, early 50s and everything like that. So um that's at least 80 years right there. You're talking, when our grandparents were born, or when they were little kids or whatever. And I mean, you just think about all the great artists. I mean, Stevie Wonder, James Brown, Curtis Smith, Aretha Franklin, Gladys Knight. That's not even mentioning the groups. You
And
know
you
what I
have to
mean?
remember too that back in the 40s, they weren't calling it R&B. That term didn't
Right,
exist. They were calling it
right.
race music back then.
Well, that was yeah, because you got rock and roll, R and
Yeah.
B, or kind of went hand in hand, kind of like R&B and hip hop go hand in hand
Oh
now.
yeah. I mean, R&B comes from obviously it comes from blues, but I mean,
Right.
let's be
So they
real
rock
here
though.
for a minute. Like black people invented rock and roll. So
Right.
there's that. So it all springs from that.
Yeah,
So
and it's funny because I tell people all the time that R&B and rock and roll used to go to hand in hand like hip hop and R&B do now, and that
they
just
do.
blows people's minds. You know what I mean? That kind of branched out, did their own thing by like the early '60s, but that's a whole different topic for another obsession. But
Yeah.
you know, we're talking about all these great R&B groups that have come along, and I haven't even mentioned Michael Jackson and Prince. If you want to put them into that category, kind of maybe, you know what I
Oh,
mean?
you
They're
should. I mean, yeah, that's where they
yeah,
spring from.
yeah, I mean, definitely, and so you're going into that, and then even looking the more recently, in at least the last 30 years, there's, Mary J. Blige, there's Mariah Carey, Whitney Houston, R. Kelly,
Mhm.
even though, he's obviously, but there's
He said
Usher,
that name, kids. I didn't make him say that. We never spoke of it. He brought it up on his own. Send
but you
all
know what I mean,
compla
though.
send all complaints to Andre at vinylalbumcovers.com. I'll be sure that he gets your
Yeah, but
Go
you know what
ahead.
I mean, though. And,
Yes,
and
yes,
then,
I know.
and then you got Devontae out of Jodeci, who kind of, um, he's very influential in the R&B sound, from the 2000s onward. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And
Timbaland
there's
is.
yeah, there's just a lot, man. And to narrow it down to like five songs, that's like I don't know how to describe that. That's almost like I'm gonna kind of compare this to sports. So there's got to be at least like what 50,000 high schools in the nation, right? And you're trying to rank all these high schools and get it down to a top 25.
Hmm.
It's like doing something like that. You know what I mean?
It
It's
is.
just it's
It's totally unfair. And
yeah, it's impossible.
I'm
Yeah, it's
here
very
for every
impossible.
bit of it
Yeah.
because it's gonna
So
force us to work a little bit. So
yeah, so think about it. So throughout this podcast, you're probably going to hear some songs. You're going to be like, "Wait a minute, how come this song wasn't on here from this artist? This is probably the greatest artist of all time, and he might not even get on any of our lists." So
yeah, and if that happens, we read comments, kids. Put them in the comments because
yeah,
I'd love to hear what you think.
yeah,
Like to read what you think about like what your favorites are. And the truth is, you're probably gonna say something, and I'm probably gonna go, "Oh, dang, yeah,
yeah. We're
you're
probably going to
not
agree with you
wrong. I
guys.
should have like, yeah."
Yeah.
So,
So
I mean, just speaking for me personally, I mean, I sat there for like a half an hour just on the couch. It's like, how am I going to do this? I made this difficult not just for Dre, but for me too, and I intentionally did so just to see what would come out of it, kind of like a science experiment between the two of us. Like, what will we say if we're
Yeah,
forced to be brief? What will that sound like? What will it look like?
yeah.
So
And
I
I
did this
honestly, I
very
don't
much on
even,
purpose. So
and I don't even know what criteria I'm even going by. Am I going by my favorites, my personal favorites, or am I going
yes,
by?
that's the idea. That's what I
Okay, see,
wanted
because
you to do. The
yeah,
stuff
because I'm
you
kind of like,
love.
because I was like, man, how do you do this? I can go by the criteria of the influential impact it's had on the genre, or am I
Yeah.
just going off of my personal favorites? So
Yeah, your personal favorites, bro. That's what I was
yeah,
aiming for. I'm just
all right,
talking just the stuff that we love. We're not providing a civic service here. This is
okay,
just
got
like
you.
the stuff that we love. So, yeah. I
I
was
got you.
trying at least that's a little simpler. Like we don't have
Yeah,
to hit like touchstones in music. We're not,
right.
you know. I mean, you know your stuff, but we don't
Yeah,
have to get all historical about it. That's not necessary. Though, do I really appreciate like the intro that you did? Because I think that's really cool to kind of
yeah,
give, the younger people who may be watching this some perspective for just how old
yeah,
R&B really is, even though it
right.
wasn't called that, just
Yeah,
how old the form really is at the beginnings of
right.
the, it's very, very old. We're talking 80 years now. It really is
Yeah,
every bit that old. And
yeah.
then even if you go, you could, you know what, to be real about it, you could
Hmm.
even go back to like Fats Waller. You could go back that far. And at that
Yeah.
point, then we're talking like the 20s. I remember years ago, back in 1978, I was
Oof.
5. My shut up. Don't, I'm kidding. I already know that I'm old. We've already accepted this. But I went with my parents. My parents took me to see Ain't Misbehavin', the
Okay.
Fats Waller musical, when it was on its way to Broadway. It hadn't gotten there yet. And I went, and I remember at the very beginning they were singing Ain't Misbehavin'. Of course, everybody knows that song. And Nell Carter was the one doing it, at least the very beginnings of it. And as she's singing, she's going, "Ain't misbehaving, I'm saving my love for you and you and you. Oh, and you." And when she did "Oh, and you," she pointed at me. I was dead. I was hers for the rest of the show. It blew my head off, bro.
I
I've
think I
never
remember
seen
you
anything like
because
that.
remember we had a podcast where we discussed how we got into R&B. And I
Yeah,
think I think that was your introduction. That was the reason, that
it
specific
was
reason for you. You mentioned it. Yeah, I
was
remember
that
that.
was one of them. There were two, and I actually mentioned the other one on an episode of Slept On, where I talked about Dawn by Chocolate Milk. That was the other
Okay.
like big, huge, gigantic moment that kind of moved me into R&B. But it all started for sure when I was 5, and I remember we left the show, which had blown my head off. And on the way out the door, they had the soundtrack. And my father looked at me and he's like, "You want this, don't you?" And I was like, "You have no idea." Some such, because before we even left, I mean, he went, "Here, take it." And he was thrilled that I was into this. And he should have known better because for at least the
Yeah.
next 2, 3 years, he was either hearing Muppets from me or he was hearing Ain't Misbehaving coming out of my bedroom.
Yeah.
So yeah, it just wrecked my whole life. But that was very much, you could go back to, Ain't Misbehaving itself, or Cash for Your Trash, or oh, the ladies who sing with the band and stuff like that. Those things were done. There's a pinch of R&B in that stuff. Yeah, a lot of it's very stridey, but there's a fair amount of what we now know to be R&B in the way those things were sung.
Yeah.
So you can go back to 1920 easy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then as far as like the whole doo-wop and how how we got R&B groups, you go back to the Ink Spots or the
Oh
Mills
yeah.
Brothers. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
They're kind of the I guess the Ink Spots were after the Mills Brothers, but the
Yes,
Ink
they were.
Spots probably laid that foundation down for doo-wop, for the the tenors and the bass and and everything like that. So yeah,
Yeah.
you're going way way back.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and to be fair, I want to preface it by saying this too. I have no idea what's on Dre's list, and Dre does not know what's on mine. Although I think he can probably guess one of them. But if we don't
Yeah,
know what's on one another's list, we haven't talked about it. So
yeah,
I'm very interested. Like I'm like y'all watching this. Like I'm interested to hear what Dre's gonna say. I'm
yeah. And
excited.
you know what's interesting too? If you would ask me the same thing tomorrow, what are my top 5 songs of all time? The list would probably change.
Boo. I boo in your general direction. How dare you? No, I'm kidding. I, to be honest with you, like, I think I'm looking at my list right now and I think it's actually fairly solid.
Hmm.
Um, but I'm looking at one that I could kind of, one or two of them, two of the five that could maybe flip out, and I'll explain why they're here, like, as we get into it. So, Dre is our guest, and I'm going to be
Okay.
polite for once in my miserable life. So I'm going to ask you to go first, Dre. And we don't have to do these in order. That may prove too difficult.
Yeah, exactly.
I kind of can't myself. Maybe you can't either. So I won't ask that of you. So just go ahead with like your first pick.
Okay, so my first pick, this is a song that I remember from probably probably before I even remember anything. Sexual Healing by Marvin Gaye. It's a nice blend of post disco, it's soul, reggae. There's the bass drum. There's a little bit of funk in there. Um, this was written by Marvin Gaye himself, Odell Brown, and David Ritz. He's been a writer. He's written autobiography. He's done stuff for like Aretha Franklin, people like that. And then Odell
Yeah,
Brown, he was a jazz musician. Really really good jazz musician.
I didn't
And
know that.
this was
So
yeah,
David
and this was
David Ritz was a jazz musician. I never knew
no,
that.
I'm sorry, Odell Brown was.
Yeah, and I knew he was. Okay, I thought you said David Ritz.
Yeah,
Is
no,
like,
David Rich was a writer, author, and things
yeah,
like that. Wrote the linear notes
yeah. That
and
I
all that
knew.
stuff. Yeah,
Okay.
and so this was Marvin Gaye's comeback song. Like
Yeah,
a lot of people when they describe the greatest comeback ever, they often refer to Tina Turner and What's Love Got to Do with It, and rightfully so. But
yeah, they should.
people also forget though that Marvin Gaye's last hit prior to this was "Got to Give It Up," and that was what 5 years prior in 1977. So this was a huge comeback for Marvin Gaye. He had just left Motown. He had went to Europe, I think. He had, went on tour, came off
Hmm.
a tour. When he was, I think he was in Belgium at the time when he went into the booth to record this. And and he created this in the lab, and to this day, man, this is like a staple of like Quiet Storm, love ballads, whatever baby making music, whatever you want to call it. You know what I mean?
Mm.
This is one of those songs, and it's been sampled heavily, throughout the 40 years since that song was recorded. Um, I think Marvin Gaye was on Columbia Records at the time.
It was Columbia. Yeah, he
Yeah,
signed to
Columbia. So
Columbia for this record. Yeah.
this was his first major record without Motown, who he had been
Yes, it
on.
was.
He had been under Motown since what the early '60s. When he
Oh
first
yeah, and
broke out.
to be clear, for the
Yep.
most part, there's a very small list of people who managed to leave Motown and make a success of themselves away from that label. There are very few of them.
Exactly.
I'll
And,
get
and
into one later, but Marvin was absolutely one of them. And had he lived, man, who
right.
knows?
And
Like,
that's unfortunate too, because I always think about what had happened if he had lived. He
yeah,
because I kind of feel like he was
definitely.
finally starting to get his recognition, in the mainstream. Everybody knew, within the R&B world in the '60s and '70s, he was major. But I kind of feel like he
Yeah,
was really, really going to break out. He had performed at the All-Star game, the NBA All-Star game, a year later.
yeah.
Um, his rendition of the national anthem, which is still highly, praised to this day. Um,
Hmm.
he he was, I feel like he was just getting started. It would have been interesting to see what else he would have came up with, outside of, being under Barry Gordy, being under, that label. It would have been interesting, but when I think about R&B, this is one of the songs that I often think about. Even the music video was very good. He's in the hospital and then the nurse is,
Yeah.
checking his temperature, and it's not raunchy. It's done in a, really,
It's
what's the word?
tasteful.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's tasteful,
it's
but
tasteful. I
it's
agree.
yeah, and Marvin Gaye, as he always does, he always brings it, sang it wonderfully. Um,
Yeah. How
yeah,
old was
like,
he when he cut the tune? Do you recall?
I want to say he was 42 or 43. He was born in
See?
1939. Yeah,
Because that's just a few years younger than Tina was. So
exactly.
really, that either one of them should come back to prominence at all is one is just about as remarkable as the other, really, because it's pretty improbable for somebody in their 40s, even
Right,
then, to be able
right,
to come back that strong. It's pretty
right.
incredible, really, when you think
Because
about it.
and just imagine if he had lived, you think he would have been on that record, "We Are the World," with
Oh
Michael and
yeah.
Steve and Tina, and
You can't not put him on. He has to be there. Sure, of
exactly,
course he would have been.
exactly. You
Yeah,
know,
definitely.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
it
that's
was.
that's
Oh,
my
go ahead.
first one. Marvin, Sexual Healing.
Yeah, you do. I kind of think about that too with most people who pass away, including the one I'm about to get to. But you
Okay.
gotta wonder, like, because he was just kind of at that point where he was finding some stability. He had a
Hmm.
pretty rough period there, with Here, My Dear, and all the other things that were going on. But he was kind of finding some stability by this point. I think it would have been very interesting to see where he was going because he had no fear of drum machines because Sexual Healing is all drum machine.
Yeah.
He had no fear of the advancement of his music and grabbing
Right.
onto a whole new sound. He had no fear of that whatsoever. So I think it would have been really cool to see where he could have taken that sound.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
it's unusually forward thinking for a 40-year-old. So
Yeah,
42 year.
especially coming from that era where where you had live bands and all that.
Yeah,
Coming from Pacific, because Motown was very very structured. Maybe to a fault in certain aspects. But
depending on
he
the
made it
artist.
work.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and we often forget that Marvin had to push back against that Motown machine in order to create maybe the greatest R&B album of all time. So there's that as well.
Stevie, a lot of them pushed back. Stevie pushed back hard. The
Yeah,
Temptations even pushed back. Like
yeah, yeah,
Motown was not
exactly.
without people who pushed back, and when they pushed back, man, we were rewarded for it, just
Exactly.
across the board. First pick. Okay, so this is the one that Drake can probably predict. In fact, if you've watched anything that I've done, you probably know I'm going here. So I'm going with an artist who is largely thought of as Roberta Flack's duet partner.
Hmm.
Um, and that annoys me to no end. And he wasn't really feeling it either. And it makes sense. I get it. Okay, fine. The closer I get to you is very difficult to argue with. Where is the love? As foolish as I think the idea of a duet on that song is, it makes sense. The vocal is straight through. It should never have been a
Yeah,
duet, but man, it sounds good.
yeah,
Then there's also You Are My Heaven, which was written by Stevie Wonder, no less, which is
yeah.
great. Back Together
Um,
Again is terrible, but that's okay. And it's terrible because he wasn't well. It's
yeah,
nobody's fault. He just wasn't well. And they never finished recording the song, so that Luther had to pad it out with vocal arrangements and so on and so forth, which we probably all already know.
yeah.
But he was also an absolutely incredible musician. I mean, I don't know of a better Fender Rhodes player than Donny Hathaway.
Man, I'm telling you.
Um, yeah, he was as good as it got. You could do the exact same thing on a Wurlitzer and you wouldn't care. Like just a great player. But so he obviously he gives us that first record, Everything Is Everything, and you can feel him kind of digging, trying to figure out who to be. He
Hmm.
wasn't in complete control of the record. It's not bad. It's just he's still trying to figure out who he is. By the
Right.
time he gets to the self-titled album, he kind of knows. And
Hmm. Oh
he's
yeah.
pushing forward with You Are My Lady and A Song for You, which of course we all know. And
Man, amazing
Take
song.
a Love Song, which has been covered on Slept On, by the way, which is
Okay.
an amazing song. Um, and so on and so forth. It's such a great record. And frankly, if he would have stopped there, if that was as good as he got, nobody would have been upset about that. But then he has the nerve, the unmitigated gall, if you will, to release Extensions of a Man, which is the greatest album by anybody I've ever heard. It doesn't get any better than that for me. I mean, it's absolutely all over the place, but he
Hmm.
intends to be all over the place. This is all intentional. He's trying to show you everything he's capable of. And my gosh, I mean, Magdalena, though. Um,
Yeah.
it's the thing is all over the place. The dude is playing country. It's like tack piano. Like, what are you doing? It's real. The record is brilliant. But the greatest song I have ever heard by anybody, and this is like a firm number one. It's the only time I'll do this.
Yeah.
Um, I remember hearing this song after and I'm not that old. I heard it I think I probably heard it in the 90s the first time I heard it. I was late. I admit this.
Okay.
I remember hearing it. I'd been given the album by a friend of mine, and I heard it, and that song just absolutely stopped me. It stopped me cold. I was crying. Like it deeply affected me. I was deeply
Yeah.
affected, and forever
I
music
knew
would
this was
change.
going to be your choice. I knew you were going to have this one on here even before we started.
Oh yeah, yeah. You see, this is the one you
Yeah.
would know. Yeah,
Oh
but
yeah.
the one
Oh
you
yeah.
would know that I would pick. But it just,
Yeah.
I mean, even now, like I have to be ready to listen to that song. I can't just listen to it. Like I have to be ready for it because it
Yeah.
still emotionally affects me. Um, and for a long time, I kind of tried to, I was trying to figure out why, because, the song is largely thought to be about the African American struggle.
Hmm.
And that's fine. I mean, people take songs for what they need for them to mean, and there's certainly nothing wrong with
Yeah.
that.
Like dancing in the street, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very, very much the same thing. But the
Yeah.
interesting thing to note is that the gentleman that wrote the song, Edward Howard, who wrote the lyric,
Hmm.
wrote it about Donnie. At this point, Donnie was very sick
Yeah.
and wrote it as an encouragement for Donnie. And once Donnie realized it, he was sitting in the control room listening to the mix of the song, just wiped out in tears, just
Yeah.
gone, because he realized that his friend had written a song for him to comfort him. And
Yeah.
now that you know this, go back and listen to the lyric. It turns
Yeah.
into this whole other thing, and it's like that's why it affected me. I get it. Um, because my father has a similar neurological disorder that just as Donnie did. So I've lived with it, and
Yeah.
it's horrible. I can't imagine what he must have gone through, and it was obviously so bad that unfortunately he didn't make it.
Right.
But just that was kind of the beginnings of of all of that, and the emotion that he puts into the vocal is almost too much. In fact, it is
Yeah.
too much. Um, it's just incredible. It's the most emotionally moving thing I've ever heard in my whole life. And it is absolutely, without question, my favorite song.
And you know what's funny? That that song probably came, probably 40 years too early, because there's this big thing in this country now. We talk about mental health and taking care of yourself. And, there's this huge thing now about, oh, especially in the African American community about, going to therapists. There's this push now for Black men, especially to go to a therapist and, seek counseling and, you know, reach out. And it's okay to, be, show emotion. It's okay to be
Yes.
vulnerable. These were things that, Black men in this country weren't able to do, for the longest of times, because of, circumstances. Obviously, we don't really have to get, too detailed about that, but, and so, that, I mean, it was perfectly placed in, the 70s, but at the same time, it's still ahead of its time because, mental health is like a huge thing in this country now. You see it in commercials now. You see people talking about it on social media. You see celebrities talking about it. You see pastors talking about it. You know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
this song, man, could have been made in this song would have fit perfectly into this era as well. Imagine if Donnie had come along, you know, during this time, period, instead of in the, 70s, this song still would have struck a nerve, you
Oh,
know.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
I think so too. Yeah. Go
and
ahead.
like I've always said, Donnie has the greatest. I think Donnie is the greatest voice of all time, like bar none.
Agreed.
I mean, and there's a lot of great vocalists out there, but Donnie for me, hands down, he has the greatest voice ever across
Yeah.
any genre. It doesn't matter. Donnie's that guy, you know.
Period.
Yeah, and he
Period.
was taken he was taken from us way too early. I would have loved to have heard, what he would have sounded like, going into the 80s, seeing how he would have transitioned, it's like you said, it's unfortunate that he wasn't able to come out the other side of that, but he did, he left behind a great legacy. His daughter's still on this earth, doing her thing, making beautiful music as well. She's taking the torch and, she's ran with it,
Yeah.
and I wish we would have been able to see them share the stage together,
Yeah. Well,
um,
and we can't leave out Kenya too, because she's out there. She
I'm sorry,
works
say
as
it
a
again.
Kenya Hathaway.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
She's a professional backup singer, but she's got a really nice lead. There's
Yeah,
a version of "Is It You,"
yeah.
a Lee Ritenour song that he did with Eric Tagg as the original lead singer. And on a
Okay.
live album he did, and I can't remember the name of it. I think it's Overtime. You could find it on YouTube and probably on all the streamers. But she does this version of "Is It You" with,
Hmm.
and I can't Grady Harrell's kid. I can't remember his name. Please forgive me. But it's done really well, and she sounds good on it. And she's not singing to her full capabilities because she's a duet partner and she knows how to,
Yeah,
she's doing that. But she's an incredible voice too. So it's like
yeah,
Donnie gave us two of them that like sound
yeah,
amazing. Yeah.
yeah. Man, yeah, Don. Yeah, you know what's gonna be? You're gonna laugh at. You may be mad about this, but his version wasn't the first version I heard. So
Which
you
what
might know
was the
about
first
this.
one you
Okay.
heard?
So when I was 7 or 8, my dad took me to go see Malcolm X, and at the end of the movie, they played. I know you're probably gonna dislike this part, but Aretha Franklin has a version of this. One day, and it was more gospely.
Yeah.
But I thought that even as a kid, I liked that version a lot, and it wasn't. I don't think it was until I was my late teens, early 20s that I heard Donnie's version. And like you, I was completely blown away. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, that's where she got that from.
Yeah.
And I know they were good friends at one
They
point.
were.
Yeah, they were really good
He
friends.
worked for her for a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that that could have been paying homage to her as well, and to him as well.
Oh yeah.
Her version was more geared towards the civil rights movement,
Yeah.
connect in connection to Malcolm X, But yeah, hers was the first version I ever heard. I always loved her version, and so when I heard Donnie's, man, I was just like, wow, man, that makes sense, you know.
Oh yeah. And I mean,
Yeah,
I've heard it just probably just as you have. I mean, I've heard several take a shot at it since then.
yeah,
And I mean, we hear a lot about like, about songs that nobody should touch.
yeah,
That's one of them. Nobody should be
yeah,
doing that song other
yeah.
than Donnie, not even his daughter. Nobody should go near it except
I
him.
don't think she
It's
has
that.
actually. She's never attempted to do that, has she?
She attempted, no, she did. That's, she did
Okay.
attempt it. She did it with it's okay that you don't know, but because it doesn't appear on her album, but she did a
Okay.
version of it with Take Six, that appears on their Beautiful World album. It's not terrible,
Interesting.
but it's not right if it's not him. It
Yeah,
just doesn't
especially
work if it's not him.
yeah, and I love Take Six, but it doesn't really seem that doesn't really fit them. It doesn't seem like it would, be something they would do.
It's not the disaster that you may imagine. It just
Okay.
isn't. It's not him. And so
Yeah.
if it isn't him, because it was I mean, again, we talked about this earlier, it was written specifically for him.
Yeah.
Taylor, excuse me, tailored to his experience. It was written for
Yeah.
him. It wasn't written for anybody else. So
Yeah.
nobody else should be touching it. I do agree with you that Aretha's isn't bad either. But
Yeah.
it's if it's not him, it's just not, yeah, that just ain't it. Like, I mean, the tribute is very nice, and Tina Marie has attempted it, and Alicia Keys did at one point, and it's kind of
Hmm.
gotten around a little bit.
I
But
kind of want
and
to hear
those who
Alicia Keys' version.
it's interesting, and that's about all I can say for it. And it's no affront to her at all, or to
Yeah.
Tina Marie either, for that matter. But
Yeah.
it's just if it doesn't come from him, it should just come from him and nowhere else. Like it's too
Yeah.
perfect the way he does it. You can't touch
No,
it.
I agree. I agree with that.
So yeah. So that's my first pick. So what's your second one?